Christmas Eve in Savannah. The whole family burst into laughter when my mother raised her glass and joked, 33 and still no husband. None of them knew that 24 hours earlier, I'd stood in the snow atop Loveland Pass, exchanging rings with the man I love. When the family portrait crashed and shattered on the dining table, I hit play on the TV voice recordings, emails, and copies of legal documents appeared one by one. A lawyer stepped through the front door. My mother went pale, and the relatives suddenly fell silent. My name is Ava Whitaker, and I'm watching my mother orchestrate another perfect Christmas performance in our antebellum mansion in Savannah's historic district. The 12-foot Fraser fir touches the coffered ceiling, its branches heavy with heirloom ornaments that cost more than most people's monthly rent. The dining table stretches like a mahogany runway, set for 23 relatives who've gathered for the annual Carlisle family Christmas dinner. Mother Nadine Carlisle, to everyone who matters in this city, stands at the head of the table in her emerald Chanel dress, her blonde hair coiffed to architectural precision. She's the current president of the Carlisle Education Trust, a position that gives her more social currency than her husband's old money ever could. My father, Warren, sits to her right, his silver hair gleaming under the chandelier's light, his expression pleasantly neutral, a skill he's perfected over 35 years of marriage. Before we begin, Nadine announces, tapping her Waterford crystal glass with a sterling silver spoon. Let's welcome everyone to our table. Her gaze sweeps the room like a lighthouse beam, pausing meaningfully on each face. Sloane, darling, why don't you share your wonderful news? My older sister rises gracefully, her 4-carat engagement ring catching the light. Preston and I have set a date June 15th at the Telfair Museum. The room erupts in perfectly calibrated congratulations. Preston Ashworth III sits beside her, heir to a shipping fortune, everything our mother dreamed of in a son-in-law. How perfect! Nadine beams, then her eyes find me across the table. And Ava. She pauses, letting the silence stretch like taffy. Well, at least you made it home from Denver this year. The relatives shift in their seats. Aunt Margaret touches her pearls. Cousin Beth suddenly finds her napkin fascinating. Nadine raises her glass higher. Though I must say, 33 years old and still no husband, no prospects. My goodness, when I was your age, I already had both you girls and was chairing 3 charity boards. She laughs, a tinkling sound that invites others to join. They do. But don't worry. Sweetheart, I've actually invited the Hartwell boy to stop by for dessert. You remember James. He's recently divorced and looking for someone understanding. The laughter swells. I count the facets in my water glass 24, like the hours since I stood on Loveland Pass. My fingers find the simple gold band hidden on a chain beneath my silk blouse. Nothing to say, Nadine presses. You're usually so full of opinions. I look up slowly, meeting her gaze. The room seems to hold its breath. In my pocket, my phone rests against the envelope marked Evidence, and across the room, the smart TV waits, already connected to my cloud drive. Actually, Mother, I say, my voice steady as granite. I do have something to share. The antique Seth Thomas clock on the mantel chimes 8 o'clock. Through the windows, Savannah's gas lamps flicker against the December darkness. In 2 hours, Marla Keating will arrive with her notary seal and a written consent form that needs just 2 more signatures. I stand, smooth my dress, and walk to the television. Should we start with the voicemails, or would you prefer the emails? The room freezes. Nadine's champagne flute hovers midway to her lips. Ava, what are you? It's time everyone heard the truth about our perfect family. Growing up in Savannah's historic district meant living inside a museum where you couldn't touch anything, especially not your own life. Our house on East Gaston Street was a Greek Revival masterpiece, all Carrara marble and heart pine floors that had witnessed 6 generations of Carlisle women teaching their daughters the art of becoming ornamental. I learned to sit with my ankles crossed by age 5. By 7, I could pour tea without rattling the china. By 12, I knew which families were our kind and which ones we smiled at but never invited past the foyer. Mother ran our household like a small nation-state, with dress codes, approved friend lists, and performance reviews disguised as family dinners. "Posture, Ava," she'd say, pressing a finger between my shoulder blades during meals. "You're not stacking hay bales." Sloane excelled at this game. She floated through Savannah Country Day School like she was born in ballet slippers, collected friends like vintage pearls, and dated boys from families that summered on Sea Island. She chose pre-law at Emory, married her college sweetheart at 24, divorced him quietly at 28, and landed Preston before the ink dried on her papers. Mother called her my masterpiece. I was the rough draft that needed endless revision. At Savannah Country Day, I preferred the computer lab to cotillion practice. While Sloane practiced piano, I taught myself Python. The summer she interned at a white shoe law firm, I built websites for local businesses until Mother found out and shut it down. "Carlisle women don't do trade work," she said, as if I'd been caught selling drugs behind the Piggly Wiggly. College became our first real battlefield. I wanted Georgia Tech for computer science. Mother enrolled me at Sweetbriar for art history. We compromised on UGA for communications with a minor in data analytics, the minor being my secret rebellion she discovered too late to stop. "You're wasting your potential," she said at graduation, watching me refuse the position she'd arranged at her friend's lifestyle magazine. "Do you know how many strings I pulled? I didn't ask you to pull them. You never ask for help. That's your problem." But she was wrong. My problem was that her help always came with invisible strings attached, and I was tired of dancing like a marionette. The boyfriend sabotage started junior year. Tyler was pre-med, from a good Atlanta family, everything Mother should have wanted. But he was Korean American, and suddenly Mother developed concerns about cultural compatibility. She invited his parents to dinner and spent the entire evening asking invasive questions about their immigration status and whether they planned to return home eventually. Tyler and I broke up 2 weeks later. Marcus came next, a Rhodes Scholar from D.C. Mother Googled his family, discovered his father was new money from a tech startup, and made sure to mention at every opportunity how different our backgrounds were. She'd accidentally double-book our date nights with mandatory family events, call crying during our vacations about imaginary emergencies. By 28, I'd stopped bringing anyone home. By 30, I'd stopped coming home myself, except for mandatory appearances at Christmas and Easter. The job offer from Denver came like oxygen to someone drowning. Juniper Ridge Analytics needed someone who understood both Southern market patterns and modern data architecture. The salary was less than what I could make in Atlanta, but the view of the Rockies from the office windows was worth the pay cut. Colorado, Mother had said, pronouncing it like a disease. "What's in Colorado besides ski bums and marijuana? Space to breathe." "If you wanted space, we have a perfectly good carriage house you could renovate." But she didn't understand. I didn't want her space, measured in square feet but wrapped in obligations. I wanted my own space, thin air at altitude where her voice couldn't carry, where the family reputation meant nothing, where I could be just Ava, not Nadine Carlisle's disappointing younger daughter. The moving truck pulled away from Savannah on a humid August morning 3 years ago. Mother stood on the front steps, perfect in her pressed linen, watching me leave like I was heading to my own funeral. "You'll be back," she'd said. "This family is in your blood." She was right about one thing: you can't wash out blood. But you can choose whether to let it rule your pulse or poison your heart. Standing in my Denver apartment that first night, surrounded by boxes and possibility, I chose freedom. I just didn't know Mother would see it as a declaration of war. Denver was everything Savannah wasn't: sharp edges instead of soft curves, honest weather that didn't pretend to be pleasant, mountains that made human pretensions look ridiculous. My apartment in the Highland neighborhood had exposed brick walls and original hardwood floors that creaked without apology. No marble, no ancestors judging from oil portraits, just space that was mine. At Juniper Ridge Analytics, I found my rhythm. The office sprawled across the 15th floor of a glass tower, with floor-to-ceiling windows framing the front range. My team handled predictive modeling for renewable energy companies' work that mattered, work that built something beyond social capital. My boss, Sandra, judged me on Python scripts and presentation clarity, not my pedigree or posture. I met Ethan at a coffee shop on a Tuesday morning in October, 11 months after moving to Denver. I was wrestling with a dataset on my laptop when he approached my table in his Front Range Resilience uniform, holding 2 cups. "Excuse me, but they made an extra flat white by mistake. Would you like it? Hate to see it go to waste." I looked up at him, 6'2", sandy hair still mussed from removing his cap, hazel eyes that crinkled when he smiled. His uniform shirt had a small rip near the pocket, carefully mended but visible. "There's no extra coffee, is there?" I said. "Not even a little bit," he admitted, grinning. "But you've been staring at that screen for an hour looking increasingly murderous, and I figured caffeine might prevent a laptop homicide." That's how it started honest from the first moment. Ethan had been a firefighter and EMT for 8 years before transitioning to community safety training. He taught wilderness survival and emergency preparedness to schools and businesses, work that used his hands and heart in equal measure. Our first real date was hiking the Flatirons at sunrise. He packed breakfast burritos wrapped in foil, still warm when we reached the summit. We sat on ancient rock, watching the sun paint Denver gold below us, and talked about everything: his childhood in Wyoming, my escape from Savannah, the way mountains made you feel both small and infinite. "You don't sound very Southern," he said. I buried my accent under 3 years of rebellion and 2 gin and tonics. Shame. I bet it was beautiful. It was expensive. Everything about me was supposed to be expensive. He studied me for a moment. "You're worth more than what things cost." With Ethan, nothing was performed. He laughed too loud at bad movies, sang off-key in the shower, wore the same 3 flannels in constant rotation. He didn't care that I preferred climbing gyms to country clubs, that I wore Patagonia instead of Prada, that my idea of dinner party was takeout Thai on the living room floor. Mother's first invasion came 6 months later. She announced her visit with 3 days' notice, just passing through on my way to Aspen, though Aspen was 2 hours past Denver and she hated skiing. She stayed at the Brown Palace, summoned me for tea, and spent 2 hours cataloging my failures. The apartment was bohemian derogatory. My wardrobe had gone native. My career was surprisingly technical for a woman. "I've arranged dinner tomorrow with the Wendells," she announced. "Their son Bradley is in private equity, just moved to Denver from Connecticut, divorced, but from a good family. I'm busy tomorrow." Doing what climbing those rocks like some kind of mountain goat, having dinner with my boyfriend. The word hung between us like a challenged duel. Mother set down her teacup with deliberate precision. Boyfriend. And what does this boyfriend do? He teaches safety protocols and emergency response. So, he's a teacher. He saves lives. Mother. How heroic. And his family. Raises cattle in Wyoming. I watched her face cycle through disgust, calculation, and finally, resolve. Well, bring him to dinner. The Wendells won't mind an extra seat. But I knew that trap. The Wendell's son would arrive in Armani, would mention his Harvard MBA within 5 minutes, would bond with Mother over vacation homes while Ethan sat there being measured and found wanting. No. No. No performances. No auditions. No dinner theater where you cast me as the desperate spinster and Ethan as the unsuitable suitor. Mother's smile could have frosted windows. "I'm only trying to help. You're 32. Ava, your options are narrowing. My options are my business." She left Denver the next morning, but her shadow lingered. The calls increased weekly reminders about social events I was missing, engagements of girls I'd known at Country Day, charity positions that would look wonderful on my social resume. Then came the email to my HR department, forwarded to me by accident from a well-meaning colleague. Mother had reached out to a board member she knew, expressing concern about my emotional stability and isolation from family support systems. Sandra shut it down. But the attempt was clear if I wouldn't come home voluntarily. Mother would make Denver uninhabitable. That night, Ethan found me on the balcony, staring at the mountains. "She's never going to stop," I said. "Then we build higher walls. Or we stop playing defense." He pulled me close, his chin resting on my head. "Whatever you need. I'm not going anywhere." Below us, Denver sparkled with possibility, a city that judged you on who you were becoming, not where you came from. Somewhere in those lights was our future if I could find the courage to claim it. The evidence started accumulating like snow before an avalanche, silent, steady, inevitable. I wasn't looking for it initially, just trying to understand the pattern of Mother's increasingly erratic communications. But once I started documenting, the picture emerged with nauseating clarity. It began with a forwarded email chain from my cousin Beth, sent by accident when she meant to reply only to Mother. The thread dated back 3 months, with Mother orchestrating a campaign to encourage Ava's return to proper society. She'd been contacting my Savannah friends, telling them I was struggling with depression in Denver, suggesting they reach out about job opportunities back home. She'd even offered to pay relocation expenses for anyone who could convince me to return. The voicemails were worse. After I stopped answering her calls immediately, she'd leave messages that alternated between syrupy concern and sharp-edged threats. "Darling, I worry about you alone in that city. Mental health issues run in families. You know, remember your great-aunt Patricia. She also insisted on independence until she had her breakdown." Another, "The Carlisle name still means something. Ava. I'd hate for Denver's professional community to hear you're unstable." Then came the discovery that broke something inside me. Sandra called me into her office on a Thursday afternoon, closing the door with unusual care. "I need to show you something," she said, pulling up an email on her screen. It was from Mother to our largest client's CEO, a man she'd met at a charity auction. She'd written about her concern that I was going through a difficult phase and might not be reliable for long-term projects. She suggested they might want to reassess their vendor relationships given my fragile emotional state. "She's trying to get me fired," I said, the words tasting like copper. "She's trying to force you home," Sandra corrected. "I've handled it, told them it was a family dispute and completely irrelevant to your excellent work. But Ava, this is harassment." That night, Ethan found me surrounded by printed emails, voicemails transcribed into text, screenshots of messages she'd sent to mutual acquaintances. I'd been creating a timeline, mapping the escalation. "She's not going to stop," I said. "She'll destroy everything I've built rather than let me build it." "Then we stop letting her," Ethan said, reading through the emails. "This isn't just controlling, Ava. This is deliberate sabotage. It's defamation." "It's how she loves," I said bitterly. "Conditional, transactional, performed for an audience." He knelt beside my chair, taking my hands. "You know what? Let's get married." I stared at him. "What? I'm serious. I love you. I want to marry you anyway, have for months. But also, imagine her face when she realizes she doesn't get a vote, doesn't get to plan it, doesn't even get to attend." "Ethan, we could do it at Loveland Pass. Just us, the mountains, and whatever witnesses we can wrangle. December 24th, while she's preparing her perfect Christmas dinner. Christmas Eve, the ultimate counter-performance. While she's arranging place cards and judging relatives, we'll be promising each other real things on a mountaintop." I looked at this man who saw through all the Savannah polish to who I actually was, who loved my rough edges and rebellion, who offered not rescue but partnership. "She'll escalate," I warned. "When she finds out, she'll go nuclear." "Then we'd better build a bunker," he said, grinning. "Or better yet, we turn her own weapons against her." That's when I called Aunt Evelyn. She was Mother's younger sister, but had always been the black sheep, divorced twice, lived in Asheville making pottery, showed up to family events in flowing scarves and silver jewelry that made Mother's eye twitch. She answered on the second ring. Ava, how's the mountain life? Aunt Evelyn, I need your help, and possibly your lawyer friend. Marla. She's fantastic. Handled both my divorces and that mess with the gallery. What's Nadine done now? I sent her the documentation. The silence on the other end stretched so long I thought we'd disconnected. That manipulative bitch, Evelyn finally said, with feeling. I knew she was controlling, but this is next level. I'm getting married. Christmas Eve. She doesn't know. Good for you, who's the lucky guy. Someone she'll hate. He's perfect. Evelyn laughed, bright and genuine. Even better. What do you need? Information about the Carlisle Education Trust? And allies on the board? Oh, honey. Evelyn's voice turned sharp with delight. Did you know I'm still technically a board member? And Harold, your father's brother, he's been wanting to remove Nadine as president for years. She uses the foundation like her personal PR firm. Can we actually do it? Marla can tell you for certain, but yes, with the right documentation and a majority vote, we can remove her. The bylaws require a written consent from the majority of board members. There are 7 of us, you get 4 signatures. She's out. Would you sign? I'd sign it in my own blood if it would piss her off more. I looked at Ethan, who was now reading through the trust's public filings on his laptop. What about the cottage grandma's river house, the one Nadine uses for her garden parties but never maintains? Technically, it's still in estate limbo. She's been paying the taxes to maintain control, but she never formally transferred the deed. The plan began forming like a photograph in developer solution shadows first, then sharp lines. Finally, the full picture. We wouldn't just defend against Mother's attacks. We'd dismantle her power structure piece by piece, using her own weapons of documentation, legal procedures, and social embarrassment. Evelyn, can you set up a meeting with Marla? Preferably tomorrow. Already texting her. Ava. Yeah, give her hell and invite me to the wedding. After we hung up, Ethan pulled me into his arms. You sure about this once we start? There's no going back. I thought about every controlled moment, every manipulation disguised as Mother's love, every attempt to shrink me back into the ornamental daughter she'd designed. I've been going back my whole life. I'm ready to go forward. Outside, Denver glittered in the darkness, a city built by people who'd come to reinvent themselves. In 2 weeks, I'd stand on a mountain and marry the man who saw me as I was. And then, I'd go home for Christmas and end the performance once and for all. Marla Keating's office occupied the top floor of a converted Victorian in Denver's Capitol Hill, all exposed beams and modern glass, the kind of space that said, I win cases and I don't need marble to prove it. She was 60-something with silver hair cut sharp as her legal arguments, wearing jeans and a blazer that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Evelyn sent me your documentation, she said, spreading the printouts across her conference table like tarot cards revealing a fortune. Your mother's been busy. Can you help? Help, honey. This is Christmas morning for a lawyer. Defamation, harassment, potential tortious interference with your employment. She's handed us everything. Marla pulled up the Carlisle Education Trust bylaws on her laptop. But let's talk about what you really want. Evelyn mentioned the trust presidency. I want her removed. She uses it as a platform for her social climbing while pretending it's about education. The bylaws are clear. Removal of an officer requires written consent from a majority of board members. 7 members total, you need 4 signatures. Evelyn's in. Who else? Uncle Harold, my father's brother. He's been frustrated with her for years. She redirected funds from the scholarship program to that ridiculous debutante ball she hosts. That's 2. You need 2 more. There are 2 independent members, Dr. Patricia Huang and Marcus Roberts. They joined thinking they'd actually help students, not fund Mother's vanity projects. Marla made notes. I can draft the written consent document. We'll cite fiduciary irresponsibility, misuse of foundation resources, and conduct detrimental to the foundation's mission. But timing matters. When do you want to strike Christmas dinner, while the whole family's gathered? She smiled like a shark scenting blood. Public accountability. I like it. Now, about the cottage property. I slid her the tax records Evelyn had found. My grandmother left it in a trust for family use, but Mother's been paying the taxes through her personal account to maintain control. She never formally transferred the deed. And you want to create an LLC, purchase the tax obligation, then transfer the property to a new educational trust, one that actually funds scholarships, not garden parties. Poetic justice. I can have the LLC papers ready in 48 hours. We'll call it what would irritate her most. North Lantern LLC. She always mocked me for going north instead of marrying south. Marla laughed. Perfect. Now, let's talk about Operation Christmas Dinner. We spent 3 hours constructing the legal architecture of Mother's downfall. Every document would be unassailable. Every procedure followed to the letter. Mother had taught me that appearances mattered, but she'd never expected me to learn that substance mattered more. That evening, Ethan and I drove to Uncle Harold's ranch outside Boulder. He greeted us at the door with bourbon and skepticism. "You sure you want to declare war on Nadine?" he asked, reading through Marla's draft. "She fights dirty." "She already declared war when she tried to sabotage my job," I said, showing him the emails. "I'm just finishing it." Harold whistled low. Jesus Christ, she actually wrote this down. He signed the consent form with a flourish. I've wanted her out for years. She spent $30,000 on flower arrangements for her fundraiser while cutting the scholarship budget. Dr. Patricia Huang met us at a coffee shop the next morning. She read the documentation twice, her expression hardening with each page. "I joined this board to help first-generation college students," she said. "Instead, I've been window dressing for Nadine's social climbing. Where do I sign?" Marcus Roberts was harder to reach. He was traveling but agreed to a video call. When I showed him the financial records, highlighting how Mother had diverted funds meant for textbook assistance to her spring gala administrative costs, he didn't hesitate. "Send me the document. I'll sign it and overnight it back. That woman's turned a charity into her personal slush fund." By December 20th, we had 4 signatures. Marla had the notarized consent ready. The LLC was established, the tax obligation purchased. Every piece was in place. "You could just mail this to her," Marla suggested. "Avoid the confrontation." "No," I said. "She taught me that public perception matters. She spent 33 years performing the perfect mother. It's time for the final curtain." Ethan and I spent December 21st recording everything onto a USB drive, the voicemails, the emails, the documentation of her interference. We created a presentation that would autoplay on any smart TV, complete with timestamps and authentication headers that Marla had verified. December 22nd. We drove to Loveland Pass for a practice run. The wind cut through our jackets, snow swirling around the peaks. This was where we'd marry in 2 days, no audience except the mountains and sky. "You nervous?" Ethan asked. "About marrying you?" "No, about Christmas dinner." Terrified. "We don't have to do the dinner. We could just mail the documents, change our numbers, disappear into the mountains." I thought about it, the clean escape, the quiet victory. But that's what I'd been doing for 3 years, removing myself from the battlefield while Mother continued her campaigns. "No," I said, looking out at the endless peaks. "I spent my whole life letting her control the narrative. This time, I write the ending." December 23rd. We made the final preparations. I packed my evidence folders, each one labeled with a family member's name. The USB drive went into a small velvet box, ironic packaging for such explosive content. My wedding dress, simple white wool suitable for a mountain ceremony, hung next to my black dress for Christmas dinner. That night, unable to sleep, I called Evelyn. "Tomorrow's the wedding," I said, "and Sunday's the reckoning. You ready?" "I've been ready since I was 12 years old, sitting at that marble dinner table while she criticized my posture." "Good. Oh, and Ava, I'll be at dinner. Wouldn't miss this show for the world." "With Marla. She'll arrive at 8:30 sharp. Harold's coming too. We're calling it the Coalition of the Willing." I laughed, tension breaking for a moment. Thank you for everything. Honey, I've been waiting 30 years to see someone stand up to my sister. Thank you for having the spine I never grew. After we hung up, I stood at the window watching snow fall over Denver. In 36 hours, the careful architecture of Mother's social empire would collapse. But first, I had a wedding to attend my own, free from performance, witnessed only by the mountains and the man who loved me without conditions. The revolution would begin with "I do" and end with "You're removed from the board." Poetry in motion, as Mother would say, though not the kind she'd appreciate. December 24th arrived with a clarity that only comes at 11,000 feet. The dawn broke pale gold over Loveland Pass, the Continental Divide stretching endless in both directions. The thermometer in Ethan's truck read 12 degrees, but the air was still, the kind of morning that makes the cold feel like a blessing rather than a burden. We'd left Denver at 5:30 Driving through the darkness with coffee steaming between us and Nina Simone playing low on the speakers. Neither of us spoke much. There was something sacred about heading toward your wedding while the rest of the world slept, wrapped in Christmas Eve dreams. Pastor Williams met us at the Summit parking area, his beard already collecting frost. He ran a small congregation in Georgetown and had agreed to brave the altitude for us. "Beautiful morning for a wedding," he said, like we were standing in a garden instead of on a frozen mountain pass. Our witnesses arrived minutes later, Ethan's best friend Jake, who'd driven from Wyoming, and my colleague Sandra, who'd brought a thermos of hot chocolate spiked with peppermint schnapps. "For after," she said, winking. I changed in the truck, sliding into the cream wool dress I'd found at a vintage shop in Boulder. It was nothing like the elaborate gown Mother had been planning in her head since I was 5. No train, no lace, no pearls. Just simple wool that moved with me, warm enough for the mountains, real enough for who I was. Ethan waited by the stone marker that marked the Continental Divide, wearing his grandfather's navy dress uniform jacket over dark pants. The morning sun caught the brass buttons, made his hazel eyes look like autumn leaves. When he saw me walking toward him through the snow, his face broke into a smile that made the cold irrelevant. "You ready?" Pastor Williams asked. "Since the day I met her," Ethan said. The ceremony was brief. The altitude and cold demanded efficiency, but every word carried weight. We'd written our own vows, keeping them secret from each other until this moment. Ethan went first. "Ava, you came into my life like lightning sudden, brilliant, reshaping everything. You're fierce and tender, brilliant and kind. The only person I know who can model predictive algorithms and then cry at dog videos. I promise to be your shelter without being your cage, your partner without being your savior, your husband while you remain entirely yourself. I promise to love not who you were taught to be, but who you are and who you're becoming. Only truth. Always." My hands shook as I pulled out my vows, written on a piece of paper already damp with tears. I hadn't realized I was crying. "Ethan, you saw through every performance to find the person underneath. You loved my rough edges, my rebellion, my refusal to fit the mold. With you, I don't have to translate myself or apologize for taking up space. You make me brave enough to be visible. I promise to build our life on truth, not tradition, on choice, not obligation, on love that doesn't require an audience. I promise to choose you every morning, especially the difficult ones. Only truth. Always." The rings were simple gold bands, inscribed with only truth on the inside. As Ethan slipped mine on my finger, a hawk circled overhead, crying into the crystal air. "By the power vested in me by the state of Colorado," Pastor Williams said, his voice carrying across the silence, "I now pronounce you husband and wife." The kiss tasted like altitude and promise, like freedom and home combined. Jake and Sandra cheered, their voices echoing off the peaks. Someone I think Sandra took photos with an old film camera, the kind that makes you wait to see if the moment was captured. We signed the marriage certificate on the hood of Ethan's truck, our signatures bold in the morning light. Official, legal, ours. "Your mother's going to lose her mind," Sandra said, hugging me. "That's rather the point," I replied. We drove down to Georgetown for breakfast at a tiny diner where the waitress called everyone honey and the pancakes came thick as phone books. Jake told embarrassing stories about Ethan from high school. Sandra made us all cry, laughing with her impression of our CEO trying to use Slack. For 2 hours, we were just newlyweds with friends, celebrating quietly while the world rushed toward Christmas. By 2 p.m., Ethan and I were back in Denver. I changed into regular clothes, packed the cream dress carefully. The marriage certificate went into my purse, along with the USB drive and the evidence folders. The postcard-sized wedding photo Sandra had printed at a 1-hour photo place, us kissing with the divide stretched behind us, went into an envelope marked Evidence Exhibit A. "You don't have to do this," Ethan said as I gathered everything. "We could spend our first Christmas as married people right here, Chinese takeout and Netflix." "I've been running for 3 years," I said. "I'm done letting her chase me." He pulled me close, pressing his forehead to mine. "Then let's go end this. But remember whatever happens, you're Ava Rowe now. If you want to be. Professionally, I'll stay Whitaker, but legally, personally, I'm yours." We drove to the airport separately. He'd arrive at the Savannah house at 8:45 p.m. After dinner was underway, but before Marla's entrance. I had a 5:45 flight, would land at 11:30 p.m. Eastern, making it to the house just as everyone was sitting down to eat. At security, I looked at my left hand where the wedding ring now sat on a chain around my neck, hidden under my sweater. In a few hours, it would be on my finger where it belonged. In a few hours, everything would change. My phone buzzed with a text from Mother. "Don't forget, James Hartwell will be here for dessert. Wear the green dress I sent last year. And for God's sake, do something with your hair." I typed back, "See you at dinner." Then I turned off my phone, walked to my gate, and boarded the plane that would take me to my last performance as Nadine Carlisle's unmarried daughter. The woman who would walk into that dining room was Ava Rowe, and she was bringing the truth wrapped in legal documents and tied with a bow of sweet revenge. The flight attendant offered me champagne. I accepted, toasting silently to the mountains that had witnessed my promise, to the man who was now my husband, and to the mother who had no idea that her carefully constructed world was about to collapse like a house of cards in a hurricane. "Merry Christmas," I whispered to the window, watching America scroll by below, taking me back to Savannah for the last act of a play that had run far too long. The Savannah heat hit me like a wet blanket when I stepped out of the airport, even at 11:45 p.m. on Christmas Eve. The city dressed itself in lights and magnolia garlands, but underneath, it still smelled like marsh and old money. My Uber driver hummed along to gospel Christmas songs as we drove through the historic district, past houses competing for the most elaborate decorations. The Carlisle mansion blazed with light, every window golden, the sound of laughter spilling onto the street. Mother had wrapped the columns in white lights and hung wreaths the size of wagon wheels on every door. The driveway was full Uncle Harold's Mercedes, Aunt Margaret's Lexus, various cousins' cars lined up like a luxury dealership. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment, feeling the weight of the evidence in my bag, the marriage certificate that would shatter Mother's narrative, the USB drive that would expose years of manipulation. Through the dining room windows, I could see the family gathered around the table, Mother at the head like a queen holding court. "No husband yet," she'd asked, laughing. Let her laugh. In 20 minutes, she'd learn exactly what I'd been doing instead of hunting for her approved husband. I walked through the front door without knocking. It was still technically my family home, though it hadn't felt like home in years. The foyer smelled like pine and cinnamon, Mother's signature Christmas potpourri. I could hear her voice from the dining room, telling some story about the charity gala, everyone making appreciative noises at the right moments, taking a breath. I walked into the dining room. Ava. Mother's face shifted through surprise, annoyance, and finally settled on disapproval. "You're late, and you're not wearing the green dress." I was wearing black, a simple sheath dress that needed no approval. Traffic from the airport? Well, sit down. We've already said grace. Sloane was just telling us about the wedding venue. I took my usual seat, the one with the slightly wonky leg that Mother had never bothered to fix because it was my chair. Around the table, faces turned toward me with varying degrees of interest, cousins who'd grown successful and smug, aunts who'd perfected the art of genteel cruelty, uncles who'd learned to stay quiet and drink steadily. Before Sloane continues, Mother said, not even letting me settle. Everyone. Ava's been living in Denver doing, what is it again? Dear computer things. Data analytics for renewable energy companies. I said evenly, yes. Well, the important news is that James Hartwell will be joining us for dessert, recently divorced, you know, but from such a good family. His mother and I were at Sweetbriar together. The relatives made appropriate cooing sounds. Cousin Beth actually clapped. 33 and still no husband. Mother raised her champagne glass, repeating her earlier joke for those who'd missed it. But don't worry, darling. James is very understanding about women who've focused too much on their careers. The laughter rippled around the table. I felt the wedding ring on its chain against my chest, Ethan's promise circling my heart. Actually, Mother, I said, standing slowly, I do have something to share. I walked to the television, pulled out my phone, and connected it to the smart TV with 3 quick taps. The screen flickered to life behind Mother's head. What are you doing? She demanded. It's time everyone heard the truth about our perfect family, I said, holding up the USB drive. Should we start with the voicemails, or would you prefer the emails? The room froze. Forks hovering, glasses suspended. Everyone suddenly alert, like animals sensing danger. The voicemails, I think, I said, pressing play. Mother's voice filled the room from 2 months ago. Ava, it's your mother. I've been patient, but this Denver experiment needs to end. You're embarrassing the family. Do you know what people are saying? That you're too difficult to marry. I'm trying to help you. But if you don't come home soon, I'll have to take steps. Don't make me explain to everyone that you're having mental problems like your great-aunt Patricia. The next voicemail started automatically. Since you're not answering, I've reached out to your employer. Someone needs to know you're unstable. It's for your own good. Turn it off, Mother said, her voice sharp. Oh, we're just getting started, I said, clicking to the email folder. The screen displayed her message to my company's CEO, the one where she suggested I was having a breakdown, unreliable, possibly dangerous to their reputation. Gasps around the table. Uncle Harold leaned forward, reading intently. Aunt Evelyn, who'd arrived while I was connecting the phone, smiled like a cat with cream. Nadine, my father said quietly. What is this? She's being dramatic, Mother said, but her hands trembled. I was concerned enough to try to get me fired. I pulled out the folders, handed them around the table. Everyone gets their own copy. Email transcripts, voicemail recordings, documentation of Mother's attempts to sabotage my career, my relationships, my entire life in Denver. The antique clock chimed 8:30. Right on schedule. The doorbell rang. That would be my lawyer, I said. Your what? Mother stood, her face flushing. Marla Keating walked in without waiting for anyone to answer, briefcase in hand, wearing a severe black suit that meant business. Good evening, everyone. I'm here on behalf of my client, Ava Rowe. Whitaker, Mother corrected automatically. No, I said, pulling the wedding ring from under my dress and sliding it onto my finger. Rowe. I was married yesterday morning at Loveland Pass in Colorado. My husband should be arriving any moment. The sound Mother made wasn't quite a scream, more like air leaving a punctured tire. As if on cue because Ethan had always had perfect timing, my husband walked through the door. He was wearing his best jacket, the one that made his shoulders look broader, his presence filling the doorway. He crossed to me, kissed me gently, then turned to face the room. Ethan Rowe, he said simply. Pleasure to meet you all. This is a joke, Mother said, sinking into her chair. You got married without telling me. Without your permission, I finished. Yes, without your input, your planning, your approval, my wedding, my choice. The marriage is legal and binding, Marla added, pulling documents from her briefcase. But that's not why I'm here. I'm here regarding the Carlisle Education Trust. Marla opened her briefcase with theatrical precision, pulling out a document that would change everything. This is a written consent form for the removal of Nadine Carlisle from her position as president of the Carlisle Education Trust, citing fiduciary irresponsibility and conduct detrimental to the Foundation's mission. That's ridiculous, Mother said, but her voice wavered. You can't. Actually, we can, Uncle Harold said, standing. I've already signed it. Nadine, you've been using Foundation funds for your personal social climbing for years. As have I, Aunt Evelyn added, raising her hand. Signed, sealed, and notarized. Dr. Patricia Huang and Marcus Roberts have also provided their signatures. Marla continued. That's 4 out of 7 board members, a clear majority. Mother's face cycled through colors I'd never seen on human skin. Warren, tell them. My father looked at the evidence spread across the table, at the emails where his wife had tried to destroy their daughter's career, at the woman he'd married 35 years ago who'd become someone unrecognizable. Where do I sign? He asked quietly. Warren. He took Marla's pen, signed his name with deliberate strokes. 5 out of 7. It's over. Nadine. The room fell silent except for the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway. Mother gripped the edge of the table like she might fall without it. There's more, I said, pulling out the second folder. The cottage on the river, grandmother's house that you've been using for your garden party's North Lantern LLC, has purchased the tax obligations. The property has been transferred to a new educational trust, one that will actually fund scholarships instead of vanity projects. Aunt Evelyn has agreed to be the administrator. You can't take... I'm not taking anything, I said. I'm returning it to its intended purpose. Grandmother wanted that house to benefit the family's education. Now it will... Mother stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. You ungrateful... Careful! Ethan said, his voice calm but firm. That's my wife you're about to insult. She turned on him, her perfect composure finally cracking completely. You turned her against me. No, I said, standing to face her. You did that yourself. Every controlling move, every manipulation, every attempt to force me into your mold. Ethan just loved me enough to help me see I deserved better. This is betrayal. This is consequences, I corrected. For 33 years, you've controlled through fear, manipulation, and the family name. You tried to destroy my career rather than accept my choices. You attempted to sabotage my happiness because it didn't match your vision. I looked around the table at relatives who'd spent decades enabling her behavior through silence. Some looked shocked, others relieved, a few almost gleeful. From now on, I continued, whoever respects boundaries stays in my life. Anyone who doesn't is out. No negotiations, no performances, no exceptions. The doorbell rang again. Through the window, I could see James Hartwell standing on the porch with a bouquet, the man Mother had arranged as my consolation prize for being unmarried at 33. Should someone get that? Cousin Beth asked awkwardly. Let him wait, I said. Or better yet, let him leave. I'm done with arrangements. Marla gathered her papers, her work complete. The board transition will be formalized at the January meeting. Nadine, you'll need to transfer all Foundation documents to the interim president within 30 days. Who's the interim president? Mother asked, her voice hollow. Me, Harold said. And my first act will be to audit the last 5 years of expenses. Mother sank into her chair, looking suddenly older, smaller, like an actress who'd forgotten her lines after the curtain fell. The room felt suspended, everyone waiting for her next move. But she had nothing left. The queen had been dethroned at her own feast. I think we're done here, I said, taking Ethan's hand. We have a flight to catch. You're leaving. Sloane finally spoke, her perfect facade cracked with confusion. On Christmas, our marriage, our choice, I said. We're spending our first Christmas as husband and wife in the mountains, where we belong. I looked at Mother one last time. She sat surrounded by the wreckage of her carefully constructed evening evidence folders scattered across her heirloom table, relatives reading her attempts at sabotage, her presidency stripped away, her younger daughter married without permission or pageantry. I got married to someone who loves me for who I am, not who you wanted me to be, I said. From tonight forward, I don't hide or ask permission to be happy. That's my Christmas gift to myself. Ethan and I walked out together, leaving behind the mansion that had never been home, the mother who'd mistaken control for love, the life that had been scripted for me before I was born. Outside, Savannah's December night wrapped around us, warm and damp and somehow less suffocating than the house we'd just left. You okay? Ethan asked as we got into our rental car. I'm free, I said, and realized it was true. As we drove toward the airport, my phone buzzed with texts from relatives, some supportive, some shocked. Aunt Evelyn's just saying, "That was magnificent." I turned it off. They could process without me. 8 hours later, we were back in Denver, watching the sunrise paint the mountains gold from our apartment. The wedding ring caught the light on my finger, no longer hidden, no longer a secret. Ethan made coffee while I stood at the window, feeling the weight of 33 years of performance finally lift from my shoulders. No regrets, he asked, handing me a mug. None, I said, and meant it. My mother asked if I had a husband yet. The answer was yes. I just chose not to let her turn it into another performance. The mountains stood witness to our new beginning, solid and unchanging, indifferent to the dramas of the families in their shadows. Somewhere in Savannah, Mother was waking up to a reality she couldn't control, a daughter she couldn't mold, a life that had slipped through her perfectly manicured fingers. But here in Denver, in the thin air where I'd learned to breathe, I was exactly where I belonged, married to a man who saw my truth, free from the suffocating expectations of the past, author of my own story at last. The revolution hadn't ended with a whisper or an apology or a slow fade to reconciliation. It had ended with legal documents and witnessed signatures, with truth laid bare at the Christmas table, with a daughter walking away from a mother who'd loved an image more than the person. Clean, final, necessary. Merry Christmas, Mrs. Rowe, Ethan said, pulling me close. Merry Christmas, Mr. Rowe, I replied, and kissed my husband as the city woke up below us, starting their own Christmas morning while ours had already been won. Thank you for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Please comment below and let's connect. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts on Ava's journey. What would you have done in her situation?